The baby wasn't coming right. I knew it before the women said anything. I knew it the way you know a storm before the sky changes, something in the air, something in the silence of the birthing lodge that pressed against my chest like a flat stone. I was standing outside. That was the way of things. Men waited, men paced, men stared at the fire and pretended they weren't scared half to death. But I wasn't pretending. I was the chief of my people. I had ridden into gunfire without my hands shaking. I had watched men die and kept my face like carved wood because that's what was needed. But Chayton was in there, and Chayton was my whole world wearing a woman's face. Her name meant Little Hawk. I gave it to her myself. The winter she rode my horse without permission and didn't even look ashamed when I caught her. She just tilted her chin up and said, "The horse looked bored." I didn't laugh. I waited until I turned around, and then I laughed until my ribs hurt. That was 12 years ago. Now she was in that lodge, laboring since before the sun came up, and the sun had already gone down. My aunt came out first. Old Maka, who had delivered half the children in our camp and never once looked worried doing it. She looked worried. She didn't speak to me directly. She looked somewhere past my left shoulder and said the baby was turned wrong, that Chayton was losing blood, that they had done everything they knew how to do. I asked her what else there was. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The white woman. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest." We had taken the woman 6 weeks before, a raid gone sideways. We hadn't gone looking for a fight, but the soldiers came anyway. And when the smoke cleared, there was a wagon tipped over in the grass and a woman sitting beside it who didn't run, didn't scream, just looked at us with eyes the color of creek water and said, very calmly, "I'm a doctor's assistant. If anyone is hurt, I can help." 2 of my men were hurt. She helped. We didn't let her go. That part I'm not proud of, but I'll tell it true. I was afraid of what she'd say when she got back. Afraid of what would follow. So she stayed, and she lived in a lodge at the edge of camp, and the women brought her food, and she wasn't mistreated. But she wasn't free either. Her name was Ruth. She never cried that I saw, never begged. She just existed, like she was waiting for something she'd already decided was going to happen eventually. It unsettled my men. They said she had strange medicine. Maybe she did. When I came to her that night, she was sitting by a small fire, sewing something. She looked up when I pushed the flap open, and she didn't look surprised to see me there. I said, "My wife is dying." She put down the sewing. She said, "Take me to her." No hesitation. No what do I get in return. No fear even, or if there was fear she'd put it somewhere I couldn't see it. She just stood up, smoothed her skirt, and waited for me to lead. I have thought about that moment many times in the years since. What it cost her to follow a man who had taken her freedom into the dark of a Lakota camp to save a woman she didn't know. I think it cost her everything, and she paid it anyway. The lodge was hot and close and smelled like iron. I won't describe everything I saw when I walked in. Some things belong only to the people who live them. But I'll tell you, Chayton's eyes were closed, and her breathing had gone shallow, and the women parted when I came through, because there was nothing left for them to do. Ruth went straight to her. No hesitation, no standing at the door looking uncertain. She knelt down, spoke in a low voice to my aunt, who barely understood her. And my aunt, who trusted no one outside our people, answered her. Started talking, used her hands to show what had happened. Ruth nodded. She was already pushing her sleeves up. She looked back at me once, just once. She said, "I need you to trust me," I said. "Save her and you'll have it." She turned back around and got to work. I don't know how long it was. It felt like the length of my whole life, compressed into something I had to stand still through. Ruth worked like I've never seen a person work. Not frantically, not with panic, with this terrible, focused quiet. She gave instructions in broken pieces, half English, half gestures, and my aunt followed them. At some point, old Maka started anticipating what she needed before she asked. At some point, the 2 of them were moving like they'd worked together for years. I sat on the ground, just outside the entrance, with my back against the lodge poles because my legs stopped working at some point, and I didn't trust them. I prayed. Not in the way some men perform praying, out loud for others to witness. I prayed the way a man prays when he has run out of everything else, quietly, desperately, to anything that was listening. The night got cold, and then a sound, small, furious, wet and angry, and the most beautiful thing I had ever heard in my entire life, my son, crying. And then, seconds later, a sound I didn't expect that undid me completely. Ruth's voice. Laughing, not loud, just a small, exhausted, relieved sound, like something she couldn't hold in. They let me in. Chayton was pale as birch bark and so tired she couldn't lift her arms, but her eyes were open. and she was looking at the bundle my aunt had just placed on her chest, and she had the expression on her face that I had seen exactly twice before. Both times she'd looked at me, early on, before she had any reason to trust me, and trusted me anyway. Like, oh, there you are, I've been waiting. I sat beside her, I didn't speak. I just put my hand on her hair and she leaned into it, which took everything she had left. After a while she said very quietly, "The white woman." I said, "Ruth." She said, "Is she still here?" I looked back. Ruth was in the corner of the lodge, sitting against the far wall, her dress stained, her hair pulled loose, her eyes closed. She might have been sleeping. She might just have been very, very still. Chayton said, "Bring her." I went over and crouched down in front of her. Up close, she looked younger than I'd thought, and more tired, and there was something around her eyes that told me she'd been holding herself together with nothing but will for a very long time. I said, "She's asking for you." Ruth opened her eyes. I said, "She wants to thank you." Ruth said quietly, "She doesn't need to." I said, "I know, come anyway." She came. She sat beside Chayton, who reached out with one weak hand and took hers, and didn't let go. They looked at each other for a long time without saying anything. Then Chayton said, in careful English, she had been learning, I didn't know how much, "You stayed." Ruth looked down at their joined hands. Then she said, "There was nowhere else to be." Chayton nodded, like that was the exact right answer, like she already knew. Then she said, "You will not be a prisoner anymore." I said, from behind them, "That's already decided." Ruth looked back at me. I said, "You can go whenever you want. I'll give you a horse, food, safe passage to the nearest town." I paused. "Or you can stay, that offer is also open." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at Chayton. Then she looked at the baby, who had started fussing again, small outraged sounds, working his little fists. She did something then that I didn't expect. She laughed again. That same quiet, helpless sound, she said. "He's going to be loud, isn't he?" Chayton said very seriously. "His father is loud." I said, "I am not loud." Both of them looked at me. I let it go. Ruth stayed. Not because she had nowhere to go. She did. She had a sister in Kansas, a life she'd been traveling toward when we found her. She wrote to that sister eventually, long letters that one of our younger men rode to town to post, and she got letters back. She stayed because, I think, something happened in that lodge that night that doesn't have a word in English or Lakota. Some kind of knot that forms between people when they have been through fire together. She and Chayton were inseparable within a month. I would come back to the lodge and find them sitting together, Chayton nursing the baby and Ruth, reading aloud from whatever book she'd managed to borrow, and they'd both look up at me with the same expression. Not unwelcome, exactly, but like I'd interrupted something. I started announcing myself before entering my own home. My aunt thought this was hilarious. She told everyone. The following spring there was a ceremony. It wasn't something we did often, but Chayton wanted it. And when Chayton wanted something, she had a way of making it happen through sheer patient persistence. She wanted it acknowledged. Made real in the way our people made things real. Not on paper, not with signatures, but with witnesses and words and something that couldn't be undone. Ruth stood before the fire in a dress Chayton had made her. Blue and white, beaded along the collar, more beautiful than anything Ruth said she'd ever owned. And Chayton, still not fully strong, still moving carefully, stood across from her. And the words were said, "Sister." In Lakota, it's not just a word, it's a declaration. It means, I see you. I claim you. Whatever comes for you now comes through me first. I watched Ruth hear it translated. My aunt did the translating, which was its own small miracle, and I watched something happen in her face. Something that had been held very tight for a very long time. "Let go," she cried. Properly, not the way she'd held herself back for 6 weeks in that edge of Camp Lodge. And Chayton held her and rocked her a little, the way you hold someone who has finally let themselves be held. I looked away because some moments aren't for watching. But I heard Chayton say softly, "You're not alone anymore." And I heard Ruth say, muffled, "I didn't realize how much I needed someone to say that. My son is 4 years old now. His name means one who heals, which Chayton chose." And Ruth pretended not to be moved by, and then cried about later when she thought no one was looking. I was looking. I didn't say anything. He follows Ruth everywhere. She's teaching him English and he's teaching her Lakota words for things. Mostly, animals and foods, which is apparently all a 4-year-old finds important in this world. Yesterday he tried to teach her the word for sky and then got distracted by a beetle, and they both ended up on their stomachs in the dirt examining it. Chayton called them both impossible. She was smiling when she said it. I've been asked sometimes how I tell this story, whether it shames me that we kept her. That Ruth came to us in chains, essentially, and then chose to stay. I tell it true because she deserves that. She deserved better than what we gave her at the start. She got something different at the end. Something she said herself she hadn't had in a long time. A place. People. A sister who would fight for her. Whether that makes it right, I don't know. I know that on the nights when the stars are sharp and the camp is quiet, and I sit outside just to breathe for a minute, sometimes Ruth sits out there too, and we don't always talk. Sometimes we just sit there. And one night she said to me, not looking at me, looking at the sky, "I used to pray every night to go home." I didn't say anything. She said, "I stopped." I asked her why. And she said, very quietly, "Because I figured out I was already there." Inside, Chayton is sleeping with our son tucked under her arm the way she's done since the night he was born, refusing to let him sleep anywhere else no matter what anyone says about it. And the fire is low, and the stars are out, and somewhere in this camp that became Ruth's home without anyone planning it, someone is exactly where they're supposed to be. End.